All right. I think we're live. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I've been having issues with Hangouts with my microphone, so let me know in the chat if you guys can hear me. Let me make some adjustments to my microphone. Hope everyone's having a good day today. All right, cool. Everyone can hear me. Awesome. That's great. So, welcome everyone. My name is Matt. Welcome to A Fistful of Dice. And today we're going to be doing kind of an impromptu D&D Q&A. I've done one of these before, and it was really well received, and we had a lot of people show up sort of in the afternoon, so that's really cool. So that's what we're going to do today. It's a beautiful day here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm having a good work day, being very productive this week. So I thought I'd just take, 45 minutes to an hour here and hang out and answer some of your guys' questions. So let's get to it. We've got a few questions already in the chat. So I'm just going to start from the top and kind of work my way down. Go ahead and leave a question in the chat if you want to. And if I, for some reason, skip over your question because I'm just kind of trying to keep up with stuff, feel free to post it again if after like 5-ish, 10-ish minutes I haven't answered it, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So our first question comes from Josh Floyd, who asks, should I piggyback off of my old Dungeon Master's world or start fresh? My players liked their characters from the last campaign, but I kind of want a clean slate for my first time dungeon mastering. Thoughts? So, especially if this is your first time dungeon mastering, I would think that it would be really difficult to play off of somebody else's world and somebody else's campaign and trying to keep everything straight in your head and using the same characters and stuff, because what's going to happen is the players are going to sort of compare your campaign to the last campaign, and especially if it's one that they really enjoyed and they're really attached to, you don't really want to go into a campaign with all of that baggage. But if they're really sold on using the same characters, maybe think about doing something like the characters go to a new world, or get teleported to a new world, or whatever, something like that. I've done things like that in the past where I used to be in a game group where we would kind of switch off dungeon masters, every campaign or so. But we had the same characters, and it was kind of cool to be able to take those characters from, one campaign to a different campaign. So if they're super attached to the characters, maybe think about letting them keep the characters. But I would stray away from sort of building upon what another dungeon master has done. That can be fun, but if it's your first time dungeon mastering, I would maybe think about straying away from that, just so you don't run into those hurdles of like, well, that now they're going to constantly compare me to the other dungeon master and compare this campaign to the other campaign. So, yeah, maybe think about not doing that. Let's see here. The Orc Warlord asks, what is the best way to keep your players intrigued other than giving them cool equipment or things of that sort? So by intrigue, do you mean keeping them involved, keeping them interested, things like that? The best thing to do is look at their characters. Think about what their characters are like. What are they into? What are their goals? What are their motivations? Look at their backgrounds. Try to involve characters and locations and stuff from the character's backstory. So instead of, thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to give them cool shit until they, don't want it anymore or whatever. Like, look at, okay, this character, this ranger, he hails from these woods and he was raised by elves. Why don't you go visit that village that he's from, or include an elf from his background, his adoptive father or mother or something. The best way to involve your players is to involve your players. So get them involved in the world building, tell a collaborative story. That's the best way to keep them sort of immersed and intrigued with your campaign. Brownsky says, hey, just wanted to say I'm a big fan. Thank you for all your content and helping out a new DM. Absolutely, man. Bownsky, not Brownsky. Bownsky. I'm really happy that I could help you out, and thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Philip Maddie, hey guys, question. What do you do if two characters are not necessarily getting along like you'd hope? Is it my job as a DM to coordinate their characters sharing their common goal? That can always be tough, especially if it's not necessarily just the characters, but the players who are not necessarily getting along. I've had a lot of experience with that, believe it or not, in my various game groups. The best thing I can say is that give them a common plight. Give them something that they can work towards together. sort of a enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing, where if they have something that is affecting both of them in different ways and they both need to deal with it, a certain conflict, an enemy, something like that, kind of forcing them to work together, putting them in a situation where they don't have time to not get along is kind of the easiest way to do that. But that's a tough situation, man, and it can be stressful as a dungeon master, especially because one of your jobs as a dungeon master is to try and make sure that everyone, including yourself, is having fun at the table. And so when you have players and characters that are fighting and not getting along or have different goals, it can just really drag the entire energy of the table down. So yeah, I wish you luck with that. Crimson Skies. Hey, Matt. So you and the other members of Absolute Tabletop have inspired me to start my own YouTube channel. Any advice for someone brand new to doing videos and running a channel? That's awesome, man. I'm really glad that you have been inspired to start creating content and put yourself out there. The best advice I can give you is don't talk about things that you think people want to hear. Talk about things that you're passionate about. So think about the things about gaming that you're into, that you think are cool, that make you excited, and give your take on them. It doesn't matter if people have done it in the past. There's 1,000,001 videos out there about Dungeons and Dragons and about role-playing games, and pretty much every topic has been talked about. But what I do and what other content creators do is we weigh in, we give our opinions on things. So even though there's 1,000,000 videos about making better combat encounters, you're going to get a different take if you watch a Fistful of Dice video about making combat encounters versus a Drunkens and Dragons video about making combat encounters, or a Nerdarchy video about making combat encounters. Like, they're all different, and they're all different styles, and you can learn something from all of it. So talk about things you're passionate about. And then in terms of actually making the videos, give yourself a rough outline. Just take a note card and write down the points that you want to talk about, just so you can remember. It'll make you feel a little bit better going into the video if you have kind of an outline idea, but don't necessarily write yourself a script. There are, content creators out there that just kind of read off of a script, and you can kind of tell that they're just sort of like reading, and it's not as engaging. And then in terms of tech stuff, before you get a good webcam, get a good mic. Audio quality is much more important than video quality, and in fact, people tend to listen to videos more than they watch them on YouTube, and so focusing on the audio quality of your videos is going to be more beneficial in the long run than investing in like a really nice webcam or something like that. But yeah, that's my advice for you. So good luck with that, man. Desert Raven Gamer, what do you do when you come up with a really cool idea for an image, but you have no idea how to continue with it? For example, in my game, I had a spaceship disappear for a second and then come back. What do you do when you come up with a really cool idea for an image, but then have no idea how to continue with it? Okay, so like, you have a really neat concept, you have a really neat idea, but you don't know how to necessarily execute it or make it matter in the campaign. I sort of had a similar experience with the Provokers. Let me take a quick drink here. By the way, you might hear like screaming children in the background. Those are not... They're not in any way affiliated with me. I live in a small townhouse complex in Tacoma, and the kids like to play out here in the courtyard, and so there's just constantly children in my garden out here. So I had a similar experience with the Provokers. About 3 or 4 sessions in, I had this very vivid image in my mind of the... spoilers, by the way, if you haven't finished the first Provokers campaign. But I had an image in my head of the Corruptor and his Griffin fusing into one creature, like Final Fantasy boss style, and being this sort of like monstrous sort of thing that the Provokers would then have to fight. And I had no idea how I was going to do this, and well, like how it was going to work. And obviously with D&D, you can always just say, well, magic happens and that occurs. But at that time, we hadn't really fleshed out what the Bleak was and all of that kind of stuff. And there were a lot of things about Aeronoth that I didn't have sort of figured out or anything like that. And so that image just sort of stuck with me. So the thing that I can say to you is, like, if you have an image like that, or you have an idea, a concept that might not be ready to use or not fleshed out enough, write it down somewhere. Make sure that you write it down, even if it's just, on your phone. Put it on a note on your phone, or if you have some sort of like notepad or something that you write on, write down that idea so you don't forget it. And constantly kind of be thinking about, when is a good time to sort of work this in, or do I want to work this in now? Do I want to try to make this work now within the context of the world and the campaign and all that kind of stuff? So it can be kind of frustrating if you have a really neat idea but you're not sure how to use it. But you can always kind of make it work. And if you just give it time and make sure that you don't forget about it, there will come a time where you're like, here it is. This is the perfect time. Forbidden Lore. Has your taste in game systems evolved over time? If so, how? Was there a pivotal moment that shifted your interest, or has it happened gradually? What did you like before versus what you like now? That's a cool question. I like that. Yeah, definitely. I've experienced several shifts in my sort of gaming philosophy and my interests in gaming, and I think that that's natural. I think that is... I think if you don't experience those shifts in gaming philosophy in the things that you want to play, then you might have you might be more closed off than you should be. So, for instance, like, I played 3rd edition and 3.5 for many, many years, and then Pathfinder came out after 4th edition, and I tried 4th edition a little bit and didn't really care for it. Pathfinder was like the perfect sort of thing for me at the time because I was still really into 3rd edition. I really liked the mechanics of 3rd edition, and I felt comfortable with that system. And so having something like Pathfinder where it was like, hey, it's like 3rd edition, but it's just a little streamlined, and a lot of the weird things are kind of taken out and reworked, like, grappling rules are a lot simpler in Pathfinder and things like that. And so that was really cool for me. But there came a certain point where I had been playing 3rd, 3.5, and Pathfinder for like a decade or more, and it was getting old, and I was looking for something that was less finicky, less crunchy, that had more of a, I don't know, that was just simpler. And I found myself kind of looking at different systems. Castles and Crusades was one that sort of sated my appetite for a while, also based on 3rd edition, but with more of a kind of an OSR sort of feel to it. Dungeon World was something I looked into, but didn't really care for Dungeon World. I'm not a big fan of the Powered by Apocalypse games in general. And it was right at that time that 5th edition came out, and it was like exactly what I needed, because it still had some of the sensibilities of 3rd edition, but it also had the good pieces of 4th edition in there, and some older stuff. So there's some AD&D elements in there as well, and it was just sort of simple and streamlined and elegant, and I fell in love with it almost instantly. And now, 5th edition has been out for a few years. I have been immersed in 5th edition. Not only am I playing 5th edition, not only am I running 5th edition, but I'm writing content for 5th edition. I'm designing stuff for 5th edition, which is a whole nother level of immersion in a system, because you're constantly thinking about the mechanics and how everything works and balance and making sure that everything slots together really nicely. And so now that has been happening, I am looking for other things to sort of take my mind off of 5th edition. Not that I don't like 5th edition. I love 5th edition. It's my favorite edition of D&D and probably my current favorite system. But I'm looking at other things to sort of mix it up a little bit. Playing something like the Black Hack, which is D&D. It's a D20 system, but it's so simple, and it's got the roll under, and it feels nice and light, and it's just kind of a little appetizer, I really like that. And looking at things like Call of Cthulhu and Numenera and stuff like that, to just sort of keep yourself from getting burned out, especially when you're actively working with the system, home brewing stuff, whatever it is that you might be doing, looking at things to sort of mix it up a little bit, add variety. It's the same with anything, everything in moderation. If you're eating the same thing every day for lunch, you're going to get sick of it really quickly. So it's up to you to kind of mix it up a little bit. Okay, sorry, that was a long answer, but that was a good question, so I enjoyed answering that. Josh Floyd, how would you react to a player telling a paradox in a zone of truth? I don't know, man. I have no idea. That would be something that I'd have to kind of come up with on the fly during the game. Because you can't knowingly lie in a zone of truth if you fail to save. So a paradox is kind of a lie. You're kind of knowingly lying. I don't know, man. It would depend on the context. It would depend on what's being asked. It would depend on exactly what the paradox was, what they're saying. It would depend entirely on that. Stereotypical Strider, Marquise is here. He said, I just lost it. Here it is. Would you be opposed to a point of inspiration making a lasers and feelings hack for Harbinger? Leave it to Marquise to make business propositions on a live Q&A. I don't know, man. That would be something that we'd have to talk about. Tommy LeBlanc, I am lucky to have D&D players who love gaming. Yeah, that's good to have, man. Blake Baker, we're toying with the idea of switching over from Pathfinder to 5e. Oh, just talking about that. I know you have some experience with this, so what can we expect? Any DM tips? Thanks for your help. So, Blake, what you're going to probably, so coming from a long-time 3rd and Pathfinder player, probably what you're going to experience is that you're going to be looking for rules. You're going to be like, well, how do I do that? Like, the player's like, I want to swing from a chandelier and drop down and attack this creature. And you're like, well, how do we do that? And you're like looking through the rule book, like there's no rules for doing that. And you spend like 10 minutes trying to figure it out. And then you realize like, oh, I just need to make a call. And you're like, okay, give me an acrobatics. And if you make it, you get advantage on the attack roll because you're coming from the sky. They have no idea. Just like simple. So get sort of used to the rules being very open-ended and flexible. They're just this framework that you can kind of use. And they're very simple and streamlined. The advantage and disadvantage system, it's just one of the best things ever because it allows you to do so many different things. And instead of having to be like, okay, well, you're at range, blah, blah, so you get -2. They're behind cover, so they have +4 to their AC, but you're also doing this, so you get a -3. Like, just figuring all this out, you're just like, okay, they get a bonus to their AC because they're behind cover, and you're firing it beyond range, so you have disadvantage. Like, it's just so simple. So be, like, ready for that, and I think what you'll feel, rather than a panic or sort of an uncertainty, is kind of this like, oh, this kind of opening up, this kind of like, taking off the corset. You're just going to be like, oh, I can breathe. Like, this system allows me to breathe. And I'm a big fan of Pathfinder. I love what Paizo has done with that system, but at the same time, it can get constricting. Like any system that you're playing for a really long time, and you get used to the mechanics and you start to rely on them a little bit too much. 5th edition is a nice breath of fresh air. Gaurav Goswami. I don't know if I said that right. Hey, Matt, big fan of your work. One of my players has a personality trait that reads, gets high on magnets. And I was wondering how I can tailor a section in my campaign. Gets high on magnets? Dude, I don't know. That's weird. What does that mean? Gets high on magnets? I guess... I don't know. What is he? I also like that you said one of my players has a personality trait. Like, no. This isn't his character. Like, one of my players gets high on magnets. Like any personality trait, if you wanted to work it into the campaign, have it come up sort of organically in the campaign. A non-player character that they meet, a quest hook that they have. Maybe there's like a... Okay, maybe... there's these giant stones, right? And they have magnetic metals inside of them. And so these big giant, I'm picturing like Stonehenge sort of monuments, have magnetic material in them. And because they're so close to each other, the magnets are not strong enough for them to pull each other around. But there's this kind of like weird vibrational sort of feeling when you walk between them because there's this magnetic field that's being generated, right? So maybe you could do something like that and have the character have to deal with that and get high off of magnets. Magnets, how do they work, man? Okay, oh geez, I just jumped forward. Lost a bunch of questions. Okay, here we go. Emilian Cote. Probably said that incorrectly too. Good day, sir. What's your idea on PvP in a D&D campaign? My players told me they'd like to try some. Any tips on that? So PvP is always kind of like, I never plan for it. Like, I unless I'm running like a gladiator game where they're actively going to be fighting each other, PvP isn't necessarily something that you can plan for, right? Because it normally happens organically, where the players are like, oh, I'm going to try and stop him from grabbing that, and a fight breaks out or whatever. So I haven't dealt with PvP a ton. If your players are interested in trying it out, maybe think about doing a one-shot where they're playing gladiators and they just get to like run around a arena and fight each other, and put some cool like hazards in there, throw a tiger in there that they have to fight and stuff like that. See what they think about it. In terms of like planning for PvP, you could always do something like one of the players, like, I don't know, gets taken over by a bad guy, but that's always kind of iffy because then you're taking away the player agency. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really have an opinion on PvP. I'm not a huge fan of like instigating PvP necessarily because it tends to take a long time. It's, potentially dangerous for the characters. It might derail what the dungeon master has prepped for. So, I don't really feel one way or the other about it. But yeah, if your players are interested in giving it a shot, maybe plan like a one shot that's more PvP centric. Captain Monko asks, frequently I have problems with unique magic weapons because I don't know how to balance it out and everything gets effed up. Any idea to help me out? Well, yeah, any sort of magic item is going to be tough to balance out, especially if you're creating it yourself. I would look at stuff in the Dungeon Master's Guide or like, whatever system you happen to be using. Look at existing magic items and reskin them, or just, tinker with them a little bit, and don't give your players, too many magic items. They don't need constant magic items. And obviously, if you're playing like a high magic campaign or like a high level campaign, they're going to have a lot more magic items, and you're going to have to, as a dungeon master, you're going to have to work around that. But in terms of like creating your own magic items and kind of trying to keep them balanced, look at existing magic items, man. That's what I always do for everything, is like look at existing stuff and like just kind of customize it, reskin it, stuff like that. Bounski, do you have a favorite plot hook or monster that you like to throw into your campaigns? Or maybe if it's not a monster, a particular villain trope. So I love owlbears. Owlbears show up in a lot of my stuff. I have like an unnatural sort of love for owlbears. I'm actually, I'm in the early stages of planning. I'm going to get an owlbear tattoo right here. Big old owlbear right here. This is going to be my fantasy arm, and this is going to be my sci-fi arm. So I have no idea what else is going to be here, but I'm just going to start with the owlbear right here because I love me some owlbears. Owlbears tend to show up in a lot of my campaigns and one-shots and stuff, just because I think they're kind of a rad monster. Like, I like owls, I like bears together. They're kind of cute, but they're also, like, very deadly, so... and then in terms of, like, tropes, like, I really like... I love, like, Cthulhu, like, Lovecraft stuff. So I love working in like weird, like just aspects of weird horror, like prophecies, dreams, visions, weird unreckonable things that have existed for all time. Like the dragons in Aeronoth are very Lovecraftian, they're very like, it's sort of like that Lovecraft like nihilism sort of thing where the dragons just don't care. Like, humanity just matters so little to them. Mortal life matters so little to them that they don't even care, And you can kind of see Lovecraft sort of Cthulhu stuff throughout all of my stuff. If you look at Aeronoth, if you look at Harbinger, there's a lot of Lovecraftian things in there. If you look at Crore, there's sort of some kind of eldritch Lovecraftian sort of things there. So that's just like one of my favorite things. I love the tone and the flavor that sort of stuff imparts on a campaign setting and on a campaign. Just because of the mystery and sort of the weird just horror of it. I've always loved Lovecraft stuff ever since I was young. So yeah, that's definitely something that I usually just unknowingly work into pretty much everything I do. Let's see here. Crimson Skies, do you prefer to be a DM or a player? Do you think that there are pros and cons to both? I enjoy being both, but I've recently had a revelation, and I've realized that I enjoy being a DM more. And I don't know exactly what made me realize this. I think it was kind of a gradual realization, because I'm one of those guys that when I'm playing, I'm like, man, I wish I was dungeon mastering. And when I'm dungeon mastering, I'm like, man, I wish I was playing. Like, I always want to do the other thing, And playing is nice because you get to kind of just like show up and like, interact with cool characters, and you get to embody a character and roll some dice and do cool stuff. But as a DM, it's just, I love the sort of improv reactionary nature of it. And I've always been a storyteller. I've always loved telling stories. And even though you can tell stories as a player, obviously, as a DM, it just feels more, like you're a storyteller. It feels more like you're building something. And I love the process of prepping for a game and getting ready for it. And I've even come to sort of love that anxiety that I get before a game. And so I think I prefer dungeon mastering, but at the same time, I love playing too, man. And I always look forward to playing. I have a game next weekend, and I'm already excited about playing in it. So I do tend to get burnt out dungeon mastering way easier than I get burned out playing. Like, I'll always be up for playing in a game, but not always dungeon mastering, just because it requires so much more of my mental, energy. So, Josh Floyd, what are your thoughts on bringing tangible objects to the table for players? Artifacts, potions, etc. I'm afraid I might burn myself out doing it too often. So I love doing stuff like that, especially like I ran a Call of Cthulhu campaign a couple years back, and I would constantly bring like cool stuff to the table, photos, evidence, weird like clues, like eldritch clues that I would write on like paper bags, and I would like cut them out and like burn the edges of them and stuff and make them look like old like parchment. But at the same time, like you're saying, it's easy to get burned out on that kind of stuff, and like your players will come to expect it. And if you're making like terrain and props and stuff like every single session, it can get really old and tiresome. So I would just like, if you have a cool idea for a prop, like do it, but don't feel like you need props for everything. Don't feel like you need to like print off a bunch of stuff or make miniatures or make terrain or prepare physical puzzles or anything like that. But like I was at a toy shop in Leavenworth, Washington, and they had all these like cool wooden puzzle toys. And they had like this cool like spin dial puzzle that was like 3 layers, and you had to spin it to a certain time and then it would pop open. And I thought that was so neat, and I bought it and I used it in a D&D game. And it was really cool and it was really fun. But I would never like go out and buy something for every single puzzle and every single game. It just so happened that it worked for that time. So also, if you do props for every game and for everything, it gets less special, you know what I mean? Because it's like, okay, here's another huge thing that the DM did, at like every session. But if every few sessions you pull something out, it's like, oh, they get really excited. So, yeah, if it sounds good, if you have time to do it, then do it, but don't feel obligated to. Stereotypical Strider says, live Q&A is the perfect place to do business. I learned this from the president. Jeremy Novak, what's the best first session you've had in a campaign? The best first session I've had in a campaign. Okay, so I think for me, maybe Provokers, the second campaign, I was really happy with how that first session went. And like as a player, probably the best first session I've had as a player was probably Tim's Dragon Grin campaign. I loved the way that campaign started and how like I started with nothing. Like I had one cantrip that I could do. I was wearing a loincloth. I was getting crucified. Like I love that. Like as I get older and like my tastes sort of like develop, I'm finding that I love just like low level, barely scraping by, like tossed out in the desert and left to die sort of shit. Like I just love that kind of stuff. That sword and sorcery, like the ultimate quest is survival sort of stuff. So I really enjoyed the first session of the Dragon Grin campaign, and just in general, I love that campaign. Garion Masterson, what is one story or narrative you've always wanted to make into a campaign or one shot? Ooh, that is a good question, man. Let me think. One story or narrative that I've always wanted to work into a campaign or a one shot. Man, there's so many is the issue. Okay, you know what it is? Like the thing that I've like wanted to do for a long time is what is becoming Harbinger. I've had the idea or like the image or just the drive to do something gritty sci-fi space feudalism probably ever since I read Dune back in middle school. And so Harbinger's sort of like the realization of that sort of need and that drive. And not to say that Harbinger is some like crazy, unique, one-of-a-kind thing, but it's like all of these different pieces. Here's what Harbinger is. Harbinger is everything that I love. If you're like, hey, what would Matt Click look like as an RPG? I would just hold up a theoretical copy of Harbinger and just be like, this is it. Because it's the science fiction, it's the space magic, it's the Lovecraft stuff, it's this fantasy element to it, it's the worn, lived-in, clunky ships, it's Star Wars, it's Dune, it's Warhammer. It's all of this stuff that I really, really love that I'm just kind of colliding together, and me and the other guys from AbTab just kind of finessing it and making it work. So I'm really, really, really enjoying working on Harbinger. I think it's my favorite like creative project that I've ever worked on. And I love that people are really enjoying it and really digging it so far. So speaking of which, if you want to see some Harbinger stuff, in the link in the dungeon down below, there's a link to a blog post that I just posted today that has some cool stuff. It's got a cover for Harbinger, which is beautiful. It was painted by Hankering for an Ale of Drunkens and Dragons. There's a setting guide that's like 10 pages of just stuff about the setting of Harbinger, the different moons and the seps, and like a timeline and stuff. My plant just fell over. I have a plant behind my desk, and it just like... You okay? And also like a sneak peek of the next iteration of the playtest. So if you're interested in that, you can check it out in the links. Oh man, I just lost it again. Oh, I'm falling behind. Baka Pope. So you talked about burnout. What do you do if that happens? I've recently felt that a little bit, and I don't want to kill my enjoyment of the game. So if you... Sorry for burping in the microphone. If you're feeling burned out, or if you feel a sense of just like being worn down with RPGs and stuff, what I normally do is I just step away from it a little bit. I reserve a couple of weeks or even a month to just not play in any games, not run any games, and I pursue other things. I watch movies, watch TV, I read a book. You know, I look at other RPG books that I maybe haven't looked at in a while or haven't gotten to yet. I get outside, I take a walk, and I find that if I step away from RPGs, even for a couple weeks, but if I do that, I find myself inspired to get back to it. I can't wait to play D&D again because I've got all these cool ideas. I can't wait to run a game again. I can't wait to play again because I want to try this or this that I saw in a TV show or a movie or whatever. So allow yourself to step away and be inspired by other things, and then come back to it when you feel that like that urge to like, ooh, I want to play again, or I want to run again. Thomas Carpenter's here. He says, what up? Just got here. What system would you suggest for doing a Guardians of the Galaxy style game? Fate. Fate is my go-to answer for anything that doesn't fit neatly into a system that already exists. So if I was going to run a Guardians of the Galaxy game, if I was going to run a Mad Max game, anything like that, Fate would be the one. Amanda Korup says, been a fan for a long time, and it's thanks to you that I got into D&D and DMing. Thanks for being so awesome and hosting these Q&As. Thank you, Amanda. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you for the kind words. Thomas Carpenter, that Harbinger cover is amazing. It really, really is. Hankerin just, like, knocked it out the park. Logos Sarsgaard says, or it might be Iagos. I can't tell if that's an L or an I. Any ideas on keeping combat fresh and giving fighters something to do besides hack and slash? Well, so my biggest thing with combat and trying to keep it fresh is making sure that you include the environment as a combatant. Put something in the environment that the players and the enemies can leverage. So, barrels for cover, a weapons rack, a chandelier hanging, water filling up the place. Always make sure that there's something dynamic happening that forces everyone involved in the combat to react to it. A timer going off, an environmental effect that happens every few rounds, whatever it is, make sure that it's something they can leverage. So, for instance, the players soon realize that there's flame spouts on the walls of this room that they're fighting these kobolds in. And every few rounds, the flame spouts go off and just shoot a jet of flame into the room. What does the fighter do? Can I push a kobold into the flame? And you're like, hell yeah, you can. And they push the kobold into the flame. You make them have a strength check or whatever. Flame goes off. They roast a kobold. They did something cool that wasn't just attacking, and they involved the environment. So that's the biggest piece of advice, and the one that I give a lot about combat is like make sure that the environment is like a combatant. Okay, question from Sword. Can you please comment on Bitcoin's recent bull run to $2,000? Do you own any Bitcoins, and why or why not? I'm going to be honest with you, man. I don't even know what Bitcoins are, and at this point, I'm too afraid to ask. Amanda Carup. My current players are very kill or be killed and have NPC enemies plus a few NPC allies, and I want to introduce them to an NPC like Keenra without them auto killing him. So you've got a party of murder hobos is what's going on. So introducing an NPC like Keenra, Keenra is much more useful alive than he is dead. And so making that evident to your players of like, this NPC knows a lot, they have a lot of cool items, they have a lot of connections. Like, if you can make an ally of this NPC or just interact with them, they're going to be a lot more useful in the long run to you than they would be if you just outright killed them for, whatever reason. So also, like, Keenra's kind of a badass, and even though, like, if any party of 3 or 4 characters teamed up on him at one time, they could dispatch him pretty easily. The thing is, Keenra's wily, man, and he's clever, and he's never going to put himself in a situation where he could easily be killed. He's always going to have some sort of contingency or backup plan in place. So just think about, like, NPCs don't have to be helpless, like, peasants just, like, getting killed left and right by PCs. They can be powerful in their own right. They can know spells, they can have magic items, they can be really clever and strategic and have their own allies. So just think about it like that. Gaurav Goswami says, I just realized that I wrote player instead of character. Oh, yeah, for your question. Also, yeah, you said it accurately as it could have been said. Thanks for your views. I was thinking something similar as well. Cool, man. I'm glad I could help. Tommy LeBlanc, you talk fast. I bet you're a good player as well. I certainly would watch your actions closely. Yeah, I'm a talker, man. And the thing is, like, being on YouTube and, like, interacting with people as often as I do, I become a faster talker. Also, the carnies are, like, rubbing off of me in the worst way possible, and I'm talking more, so. I don't know how to pronounce this. Kalarnk. Hey, Matt, I'm currently running a campaign that is played once a week. Do you have any tips on keeping a long story fresh and new and not repetitive? Yeah, sure. Just, like, make sure that you're going to new places and experiencing new things, and, just, like, mix things up a little bit. Maybe one session, the big action set piece is a chase scene rather than just a straight up combat. Maybe they go into a dungeon and they spend a few sessions in there, and then they're in the city for a while. Just, like, shake things up and kind of try to gauge what your players want to do. The best way to do that is to just kind of throw a bunch of different plot hooks at them and see what they latch onto. You've heard rumors that there's a vampire, that's been spotted, or, people believe there's a vampire preying on the homeless population in this city. And you've also heard that there's a cavern nearby where a bugbear is currently staying, and he's been attacking people on the roads. And then the players can kind of go, well, I'm kind of interested in the vampire thing. I kind of want to go check that out. And you're like, cool, they like vampires. Noted. And you can kind of, like, work more of that kind of stuff into the campaign. Let's see. A very British GM. That's the best username, man. Hi, Matt. Tomorrow I'm giving my son his first lesson in being a GM. That's awesome, man. What one thing would you say to a brand new GM? We're starting him on 5th edition. I'm asking my favorite GMs for tips for him. P.S. Love your work, and Stone Rift blew me away. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I love Stone Rift. Stone Rift is my favorite book that we've published so far, that I've worked on. I love that book so much. So one tip, sorry, I lost track of the question because you were flattering me. One tip for new GMs, I would say, is just, like, don't worry so much. Like, don't fret. Just have fun. Try to have fun. Try to let loose and have fun as much as possible. Being a dungeon master is obviously a different, it's a different experience than being a player. I'm not going to sit here and try to say being a player and being a DM are one and the same, because they are different roles and they're different experiences at the table. But if you come at it from the kind of, I'm assuming he's played before, but if he comes at it taking what he's learned from being a player, what he finds fun as a player, and just focuses on the fun, then ultimately the session will be funner for everybody. Because for me, I know if the Dungeon Master is having fun, I have a better time. If the Dungeon Master is kind of, like, frazzled and, like, stressed out and not having a very good time, and it seems like they're kind of, like, struggling a little bit, it definitely affects, like, the energy at the table and, like, kind of makes you feel guilty as a player. So just tell him to focus on the fun for himself and the players as a whole, and to not worry too much. And Like, it's such a cool experience being a dungeon master and being able to create worlds and characters and tell stories with your friends at the table. So have them focus on that kind of stuff. Stereotypical Strider, can you talk more about your Eldritch Dragons? Absolutely, I can. So, in Aeronoth, I'll try to make this quick as possible. Also, this is very wet cement. None of this is like final or has been published anywhere or anything. But in Aeronoth, dragons are very rare, but they're kind of a big deal. So they've been involved in like two of the biggest events in Aeronoth. There's like the Primordial War at the very like beginning of history when the gods arrived in Aeronoth in the mortal plane, and there were just these like hulking elemental, like I'm talking mountain-sized elemental creatures walking around made of pure just chaos. The gods tried to sort of wrangle them in and try to control them a little bit, and we're basically like, hey, we're going to try to bring order to this chaos, and they couldn't. The primordials and the gods were just like locked in this eternal struggle for just countless eons until the dragons came to be, and the dragons were born of the blood of the primordials. The first dragons were, at least. And the gods took this blood, and they were able to control the dragons to some extent. So there was actually one goddess who was really good at controlling the dragons, and she's kind of a big deal in Aeronoth. We'll talk about her at some point, I'm sure. But essentially, the dragons were involved in that. The gods left Aeronoth to kind of recover from the big primordial war, and they left one of their own in charge. And in the time that they were gone, the goddess who was in charge basically just like became power hungry. She controlled all of these dragons, and she just like terrorized Aeronoth, right? The gods came back, they were like, what are you doing? And she was like, I'm a big deal now, all these dragons answer to me. And the gods were like, and there was a huge war between the dragons and the gods and this goddess, and it ended with the goddess and all of these dragons being sealed away into the Bleak, right? Which is this extra dimensional space. It's where all arcane magic comes from in Aeronoth. And you can cut holes in the Bleak and stuff comes out of it, and it's crazy, right? So the dragons in the Bleak are what are called elder worms, and elder worms are formless dragons. They choose to look like dragons most of the time, but they are massive. Like, these dragons are city-sized dragons, and they are immensely powerful. They are demigods, essentially, and they've been sealed away for thousands and thousands and thousands of years in the Bleak, just hanging out. And they were able to create their own life, their own forms of life, just like the gods created, humans and elves and all that kind of stuff. The dragons within the Bleak created the Dragonborn, the kobolds, and the drakes. And there's this big thing called the Great Scorching, which happened when this power-hungry guy who was in charge of the Khazran Empire basically opened a doorway in the Bleak and was like, I'm done, come on in. And the Elder Worms invaded using this gigantic army of lesser dragons, dragonborn, kobolds, drakes, all these draconic creatures that had just been hanging out in the Bleak for thousands of years, just came out, and it was this catastrophic event called the Great Scorching. Now, at this time, there was also guys on griffins that were sort of the they weren't convokers, but they were sort of like proto-convokers, and they were going to, found the convocation after this. They managed to fight back against these legions of draconic creatures, and one of them, the greatest of them, a guy named Eros the Reclaimer, he had this artifact, this sphere, and he used this to seal the holes in the Bleak and basically end the Great Scorching. But by the time the Great Scorching ended, everything was just so messed up, and the huge portion of central Aeronoth was just torched and glassed by the dragon armies, and it became the Desert of Sonageist and all this crazy stuff. So the Elder Worms are essentially these sort of Lovecraftian demigod beings that have existed for tens of thousands of years, and really all they want to do is just kind of like spread chaos and essentially just kind of consume and destroy everything. They're kept in check a little bit by this goddess who is also in the Bleak with them, but ultimately they're their own entities. So the dragon that the Provokers fought in the latter half of the first Provokers campaign, that was like a teenage dragon. Like, the dude was a baby. The elder worms that are inside the bleak cannot be fathomed. They're like, the mortal mind cannot reckon how big these things are. I'm talking like the thing sticks its head out of the bleak and you can see it throughout Aeronoth. It's a moon coming out of the sky, if that makes sense. So they're just big badass dragons who wield this untold cosmic power, and the only reason why they haven't just snuffed all life out of Aeronoth is because a hole hasn't been ripped big enough in the bleak to allow them through. That took a long time, I'm sorry, but I get really excited talking about Cthulhu dragons. Bruce Lawson, any advice for playing a character that is a mummy necromancer? I want to play him as lawful neutral, but we have a critic good paladin in the party. I'm assuming chaotic good paladin probably is what you're trying to say. So a mummy necromancer. So I would just like reskin a necromancer, man. Like go for like a wizard and do like the necromancer school and focus on those kinds of spells, but just kind of like flavor them to be more like kind of Egyptian and mummy-ish, you know? That's how I would do it, at least. Josh Floyd, how can I encourage my players to interact with the environment? Most of the time, they just hit monsters until they're dead. I want them to drop chandeliers and tip over bookshelves on enemies. The best way you can get your players to do that is if you have your enemies do that. So think about how you're having the monsters or the enemies interact with the players. Are they just walking up and hitting the players? Then that's what the players are going to do as well. But if you have your monsters take cover, flank around, use strategies, drop things on the players, use the environment to their advantage, all of a sudden the players are going to be like, hey, that's cool, I want to do that too. I also want to take cover, or I also want to light this barrel and roll it towards them, or whatever, you know? Tommy LeBlanc, what time is it? 1:53. Okay, we're going to go for about 10 more minutes here. Oh man, I lost it. Tommy LeBlanc. Storytelling is so creative, and a good storyteller is someone who will always be remembered. That is very true. Bronchitis says, being a GM helped me a lot with my anxiety. Now I am almost anxiety-free. That's awesome, man. Yeah. DMing has like just shaped me into the person that I am, and has given me so much like confidence and social skills, and just like D&D and RPGs in general have given me more skills than I can say. So I absolutely agree with that. Hey guys, Swords back. Question, do you believe that psychedelics like... No, I'm not going to answer that question. In fact, we're going to see you later. You're in a timeout. T on High Hill. Question, any advice for large-scale battles? I'm having two armies attacking the same city from different sides. They're working together. Sounds cool. I would recommend actually going to absolutetabletop.com and checking out Be a Better Battle Master, which is a book that was written by my very good friend Michael Barker, Be a Better Game Master. And it's an awesome, really easy-to-use toolkit to prep and run like large-scale battles at your table. So definitely go check that out. Bounsky says, thank you so much for your replies. Absolutely, man. Happy to. Tommy LeBlanc, I learned so much from all of you guys. And I learned so much from everyone I interact with. People leaving comments on videos, on Facebook, like all that kind of stuff. Like I learned so much and get so inspired by other people in this hobby. It's awesome. RPG Construct is here. Hey, Drake. He says, afternoon all. How's it going, man? Of the vast ocean. That's James. He says, Bamsky. Bronchitis, which level of play is your favorite and why? Low level, I would say between like at about 5th level, I start feeling too powerful. So I would say like level 10 and under is like my preferred. I prefer a campaign to end before I hit that sort of like higher level, just because like I was saying earlier, like I love that kind of like barely scraping by sort of feeling. Okay, I'm going to scroll through here and see, because I've only got time for a few more questions, and I want to get to some good ones here. Not that the questions are not good. You know what I mean, though. I'm looking for some good, meaty questions. Jordan Blyler, I'm a new DM/player. I've ran about 5 games with 2 to 3 players at a time, and the biggest problem I have is that our games are rather slow. We get through like 1 encounter per night. So depending on what's eating up the time, I guess is the question. If it's encounters, then you might want to think about running lighter encounters. Doing fewer but funner encounters. Dropping the hit points on things goes a long way in shortening combats, making them feel less like bullet sponges. So maybe think about what is taking a long time. Is it the role play? If so, then your players must just enjoy role playing and you can just kind of let them go. But if it's the other things, if the encounters are taking a long time, then maybe think about, okay, how can I shorten these but still keep them kind of exciting and dynamic? Normally what you do is you up the damage, lower the HP. So have your enemies do more damage but have less HP. So it still feels like a good climactic sort of combat, but they're not just getting hit as often. The hits count for more, if that makes sense. Let's see. Kevin Shields. Hey, Matt, you are an inspiration to me, and I'm trying to get back into D&D. I haven't played since 3.5. I have a little bit of a stammer, and DMing helps with overcoming that. Can't wait for Harbinger. Man, that's awesome. Thank you so much for the kind words, and I'm really glad that, DMing helps with that. I know it's helped me sort of overcome some of my hurdles as well. Let's see. Oh, this is a good question. Shields of War, what's your favorite character that you have played in a Star Wars RPG? Okay, so the best Star Wars RPG I ever played. It was over the summer. I was in college, and my game group, for once, we were all in town. No one was going anywhere. There were no vacations happening. We all had jobs, but it was part-time jobs. And so we decided that we were going to play Star Wars Saga Edition twice a week. And we played this campaign that was a retelling of the original trilogy, so A New Hope, Empire, and Return of the Jedi, but in an alternate universe where Han, Chewie, and Luke failed to get Princess Leia off the Death Star and were killed aboard the Death Star by Darth Vader. It was this amazing campaign that was it was a universe that I knew because it was Star Wars, but it was unfamiliar to me because the Death Star never exploded. It was still around, and it was this terror, throughout the galaxy. And I played this character named Gavik Miliardo, who was a Rhodian gunslinger that had 2 heavy DL-44 heavy blaster pistols. And he was such a fun character, and that campaign was so fun. And I remember the coolest thing was there was this dark Jedi that was the ongoing antagonist. And she was always showing up. She had this mask on and these really cool robes and this red lightsaber, and she was constantly showing up with a bunch of stormtroopers and wreaking havoc, and we fought her a bunch of times. And at one point, I may have told this story before, so you may have already heard this, but at one point we beat her in a combat, and she had gotten an Imperial shuttle and she was flying away, and we had these missile tubes left over from these Bothans that we had been helping in an earlier session, and I had been carrying this missile tube on my back for 5 sessions, and I'm I'm gonna use the missile tube, and the DM's okay, and I whip it out, and I shoot this missile tube, and I crit against the Imperial shuttle, and it half blows up and crashes into the ground, and we're yeah, we killed the Sith, or we killed the Dark Jedi, right? She shows up 3 or 4 sessions later with a bunch of mechanical parts, mechanical limbs, and her face is all messed up. We're fighting her, and she just is beating us. I think she killed one of us, and she takes the mask off, and it was Princess Leia! And we were because Darth Vader, because Princess Leia was never saved from the Death Star, Darth Vader took her as an apprentice and was training her in the dark side of the Force, and she had become evil, and so we realized that we had been fighting evil Princess Leia, and it was oh man, it seriously messed me up, but it was so, so cool. I loved that campaign. It was one of the best campaigns I ever played. All right, let's see here. Here's a question from Wayworn Worm. That's an awesome username. Hey Matt, I just started getting into your channel. I am making a new setting right now, and I've been watching your videos with PhD&D on world building. I was wondering if there will be a part 3. I would absolutely love to do a part 3 of the world building workshop with Kirk, PhD 20. that would be really, really fun. So I might contact him and see if he's interested in doing that. I know he had stepped away from doing videos for a while, but he's been posting some stuff again. So yeah, I might contact Kirk and see if he'd be interested in doing that. I always loved talking with Kirk about world building, because Kirk to me is like one of the, I love his philosophy on world building, and he just gets so like deep into it, and like just the mapping and the, making the cultures unique and stuff. So yeah, absolutely, I would love to do a part 3 of that. Let's see here. Hi Matt, I love your channel. So I'm about to start a campaign with a few friends, but we only have 3 of us without counting me as a DM. Do you have any advice for a campaign like that? I actually love 3 players, man. 3 players is like my sweet spot for a one-shot. It's really not going to be too different from running for 4 or 5 people. Just scale down the combats a little bit, kind of like you'll get a feel over the first couple sessions for the challenge, that you should be presenting to 3 players rather than 4 or 5. Just kind of like the first couple sessions, be paying attention to how much damage am I doing, how much damage are they doing, and then just kind of like use that as your sort of like foundation for planning encounters and skill challenges and all that kind of stuff. Let's see here. Jorfton says, how often and how do you change monsters for a battle, such as giving spells to monsters that don't usually have them? Do you prep this or do it on the fly? I usually prep, but I'm also comfortable doing it on the fly. What I'll normally do if I'm switching a monster around or reskinning a monster or whatever is I'll take my monster manual or whatever book I'm pulling the monster stats from, Volo's Guide or whatever, and I'll scan it and I'll copy it and I'll print it off. So I have a Xerox copy of the page, right? And then what I do is I go through with a pen and I like mark off stuff that doesn't matter, that I'm not going to be using, just so the information is easily accessible. I highlight the important stuff, so like armor class, attack bonus, stuff like that. And I make adjustments, are they going to be wearing different armor? Are they going to have different weapons? Are they going to have spells? Am I going to give them some sort of leadership ability? Am I going to up the HP? Whatever I'm going to do. Reskinning. Am I going to make this a completely different monster? Am I going to take an orc war chief and turn it into a construct of some kind, but doing it on the fly is really, really easy as well. One thing that I've really loved is like in the adventure kit that Absolute Tabletop is working on, Oath of the Frozen King, which, by the way, there's a link in the description to the Kickstarter. We have these really simplified monster stats, which are basically just like AC, hit points, how much damage they do per round, and some cool like monster buffs like multi-attack, fly speed. They have 1 spell, sort of that kind of stuff. I love the simplified monster stats because it's like, how often do you use everything in a stat block? Never. Like, you never need to know everything that's in a stat block, and I appreciate having it there, but the way that I run D&D and the way I run monsters, I'm normally not looking at all of it. I'm looking at the HP, I'm looking at the armor class, and I'm looking at their attack and how much damage they can do, and any features or abilities they have. And like, if someone's making a strength check against them, if they need to make a dex save, like, I can make a judgment call on that. I don't need to know exactly what all their stats are, so I've been enjoying that quite a bit. Hey, WSD20, Nate is here. He says, hey all, I love that Matt is doing these so often. Yes, I'm trying to do them more often because I always get a good turnout in the afternoon, man. I think it's a good time that normally, like, people can't tune into my stuff in the evenings because it's late, so. Jeremy Lilly is here. Happy Friday. All right, let's do one more question, guys. I think we got on for about an hour here. Let's see here. Gerald the Farmer. Hey, Matt, thanks for all the great ideas you've given. Wrote down a lot and used a lot of them. Keep it up. How much is too much home ruling? What is the line that you'd say? So, like, too much, like, home brewing, house ruling kind of stuff. It's hard to say where the line is because it depends on you as a DM. It depends on your game, on your game group and their play style and everything. My dog's back there. But I would say that, you never want to take away from the ease of the game. You never want to overcomplicate the rules. As soon as you're house ruling and you realize that you moved away from the spirit of the system, then it's kind of like, okay, well, maybe I should scale it back a little bit, So like, for instance, fifth edition. If you're homebrewing fifth edition and you realize that it's kind of encroaching on Pathfinder territory, and you realize you're making it a little too complicated and finicky, then it's like, okay, well, maybe I want to scale it back. Or if you're playing, Fate, and you realize that the house rules, the stuff that you're. Although I don't know how you would house rule Fate. The whole game is house ruling. You're like, Fate is like house ruling the game. But if you were doing something where, for whatever reason, like the narrative sort of like capabilities of the players was taken away, it detracted from the spirit, the crux of the system, then I would say that maybe, ease off a little bit, ease off the throttle. But really, it depends on you and your players and what kind of stuff you want to play. So, guys, I think that's going to do it for me. I think I got through most of them. There were a few questions that I skipped, so I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. I try to answer as many as possible. If you do have a question for me, I'm always up for answering questions on the Facebook page. If you go to facebook.com/a fistful of dice and send me a message on there, or you can send me a message on YouTube or leave a comment on this video. I try to at least set aside a little bit of time every week to go through and catch up on my messages and comments and all that. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This has been wonderful. Appreciate you guys just hanging out, talking with me. Again, two kind of exciting things. Links in the description. Harbinger stuff on the blog today, and also the Kickstarter for Oath of the Frozen King. Definitely go check those things out. So thank you again, everyone. I hope your Friday goes well, and I hope everyone is looking down the barrel of an awesome weekend. Take care, and happy gaming all.